The entire classroom froze into silence, not out of respect but sheer disbelief. At the front of the room, an 11-year-old boy stood clutching the shattered remains of his violin, the only gift from a father he barely remembered. The teacher, still burning with anger, made no effort to feign regret. Caleb Bryant said nothing. He simply gathered what fragments he could from the cold tile floor of that elite academy and walked out of the room in silence. What no one knew, not the teacher, not the snickering students, was who was about to walk through that door. And when it happened, their world would tilt on its axis. This is a story of overlooked pain, unseen talent, and a silent vengeance that would come not with anger or threats, but with something infinitely more powerful, the truth, played through the hands of a child. Clutching the violin case tightly, Caleb climbed the steps of the towering new building that smelled of fresh paint and expensive wax. Everything felt too new, too polished, except the familiar weight of fear pressing against his chest. New York City was overwhelming, fast, immense, but there he was, a small boy with a colossal gift invisible to the eye. He and his mother had just moved there. His mother, Lauren Bryant, had just earned a major promotion, one no one expected a black woman from a modest background to achieve. Yet she had. And with that victory came the uprooting. A new neighborhood, a prestigious new school, a fresh start. No one warned Caleb how much starting over could hurt. Lauren tried to make it easier. She carefully selected his new uniform, packed his favorite breakfast, combed his hair with fingers gentle from years of tenderness. But inside, she was as nervous as he was. She masked it with a smile. She had to be strong for herself and for her boy. "It's only a matter of time, honey," she said on the ride to school, her voice light despite the tension in the air. "You'll make friends." Caleb smiled a half-smile, the kind you give just so your mother won't worry. "I know, Mom." The school was enormous, gilded gates, golden-lettered signs, luxury cars dropping off polished children with backpacks more expensive than some families' rent. To Lauren, it looked like another planet. When Caleb entered the classroom, the room hushed for a few awkward seconds. He felt their stares, some curious, others judgmental. The teacher straightened her glasses and said brusquely, "You must be the new student, Caleb, right?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. She motioned dismissively to a desk at the back. "Sit there." No welcome. No introductions. Just a wave of the hand. Caleb moved to the seat by the wall, lowering his gaze, already anticipating what was to come. But he was not just any boy. He carried a gift inside him. The violin had been his voice since he was little. He had learned it by ear, by heart, by soul. No fancy lessons, no structured classes. Just feeling. When music class arrived, the teacher asked each student to play something. Caleb waited quietly, patient. One by one, his classmates fumbled through easy, clunky pieces. When it was his turn, Caleb carefully removed his battered violin from its case, positioned it on his shoulder like greeting an old friend, and began to play. No sheet music. No assistance. Just him and the sound. The melody was soft, sorrowful, aching, the kind that slows the heartbeat. The chatter in the room died down. Even those who didn't want to listen found themselves holding their breath. The teacher said nothing as he played, only watching with an unreadable expression. When he finished, waiting for praise, she simply said, "Improvising can be charming, but here we value technique." She turned away and called up the next student. That comment stung more deeply than any shout. Caleb's heart sank, but he hit it well. He packed up the violin, returned to his seat, and vanished into silence. Days passed, each one harder than the last. No one sat by him. No one invited him to lunch. When he answered questions, it was as though he hadn't spoken at all. But Caleb endured because he knew it wasn't him. It was the world around him, too blind to hear what lived inside his chest. Each night, after pretending for his mother that all was well, he crept down to the dusty basement of their apartment building. It was dark, damp, but it was freedom. There he played for hours, everything he felt, everything he couldn't say. In the hollow dark, he was truly himself. Sometimes Lauren heard the music floating up through the pipes. She recognized the sorrow tucked between the notes. She knew, even though Caleb never spoke of it. The elite school wasn't just about grades, it was about appearance, about connections, about fitting a mold. Caleb's mere presence, his existence, seemed to disrupt that. His gift couldn't be boxed neatly the way they liked. Ms. Whitmore, the music teacher, treated him differently from day one. With others, she smiled, joked, encouraged. With Caleb, she was clipped, critical, cold. During rehearsals for a school performance, every student was assigned a solo. Caleb practiced obsessively in the basement, every note perfect. When it was his turn, he played with a trembling grace. Silence followed, until Ms. Whitmore crossed her arms and said, "This isn't street music, Caleb. Please follow the sheet." Laughter rippled through the classroom. Caleb lowered his eyes and sat down. He said nothing. The taunts escalated. "Play some rap on that violin, Caleb. Careful, those are expensive." The jokes sliced into him, each one tiny but relentless. He bore them quietly. He had learned that answering back only made it worse. Even at lunch, he sat alone, pushing food around his plate. Meanwhile, kids clustered in noisy groups, swapping stories of vacations to Europe and designer clothes. At home, he lied for his mother's sake. "How was school, honey?" "Good, Mom. We're working on a new piece." Lauren smiled, relieved. She had no idea her son was breaking inside. He held on because he didn't want her sacrifices to be in vain. He didn't want to be ungrateful. But every night, the violin sang his grief into the walls of that crumbling basement. One day, in music class, he timidly asked if he could play an arrangement he'd created, a fusion of classical and modern influences. Ms. Whitmore allowed him to start. Within seconds, she cut him off. "Enough, Caleb. This is a serious music program, not your playground." He packed away his violin in silence. Later that day, Caleb noticed his name missing from the list of performers for the upcoming spring recital. Confused, he approached Ms. Whitmore. "Excuse me, ma'am. I think there's a mistake. I'd love to perform." She didn't even look up. "Not a mistake. You're not ready. We don't want you to embarrass yourself." It wasn't about readiness. Caleb knew that. It was about erasing him. Days blurred together. Benjamin, the loudest boy in class, intentionally knocked over Caleb's violin case in the cafeteria. The violin narrowly escaped damage. "Oops, sorry, maestro." The surrounding laughter cut deeper than any shove. Ms. Whitmore saw. She looked away. At home, Lauren asked about his day. "Fine, Mom." Caleb lied again. But she wasn't blind. She noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the absence of music in the house, the hollow look he tried to hide. One night, she came home early. Caleb wasn't in his room. She found him in the bathroom, sitting on the floor, playing the violin so softly that it sounded like a heartbeat. Tears streamed silently down his face. Lauren didn't barge in. She leaned against the door and cried with him in silence. The next day, she called the school, demanding a meeting. When stonewalled, she showed up in person. Ms. Whitmore met her with a tight smile. "Your son is talented, but lacks discipline." Lauren held her gaze. "My son is hard. Maybe you just can't hear it." After that confrontation, Caleb seemed lighter. He practiced again. Something flickered alive inside him. Then came the news. He was back on the recital program. For the first time in months, hope bloomed. But on the day of the performance, moments before he was to go on stage, Ms. Whitmore informed him his solo had been canceled again. Priority goes to students with formal training. Hope you understand. He didn't. He left without a word. Lauren, waiting in the audience, noticed Caleb never appeared. She stormed backstage, demanding answers. "Last-minute changes," they said. She saw through the lies. Lauren vowed they would remember her son's name. The next morning, armed with documentation, she marched into the school and made it clear she was not just a mother, she was a federal investigator specializing in civil rights violations. They had underestimated Caleb's family. The fallout was swift. Ms. Whitmore was placed on leave. The headmistress resigned. But Caleb's battle wasn't over. One ordinary Tuesday, Caleb sat by the window during music class, violin in hand, and played, not loudly, not seeking attention. Just him, being him. The melody floated down the hallway like a prayer. Students stopped. Teachers paused. Even janitors leaned on their brooms. Caleb's music spoke what his voice never could. When he finished, the hallway erupted in applause. One of the visiting directors from the Manhattan Academy of Music happened to be there. He approached Caleb, shaking his head in wonder. "We'd be honored to offer you a full scholarship," he said. Caleb's mouth fell open. Tears welled in his eyes. The old barriers, the whispered cruelties, the silent rejections, crumbled. The internet lit up. Videos of Caleb's impromptu performance went viral. Injustice had tried to silence him. Instead, they had amplified his voice. At his debut at the academy, Caleb stood backstage, violin polished, suit pressed, hard hammering. The lights dimmed. His name echoed through the hall. He stepped forward, and he played. He played for every child who had ever been told they weren't enough. He played for himself. He played for his mother. And this time, the world listened.